Mrs. President, it's not only an honor but a real pleasure to have the chance to be here and to benefit from sharing experiences from actors with various backgrounds coming from all over the world. My presentation, yes, changed once I saw what the colleagues were going to say. And I would like to start with a question. Is it justified to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in research, in data collection, when millions of victims are still suffering from forced labor at this very precise time and should be rescued as a matter of extreme urgency? My short presentation is meant to provide a brief overview of the ILO's activities related to research on modern slavery, and I will try to demonstrate how and why such research programs are core to any efficient policy and action designed to combat modern slavery. The action done by the ILO to support countries in their fight and policy design will be presented tomorrow by my colleagues Berta Andres. Considering trafficking, forced labor, all forms of modern slavery as signs of time, and the very special location we have the chance to be in for this conference, I would like to refer to 1961 Pope John XXIII encyclical letter Mater and Magistra. This encyclical affirms the process of See Judge Act as a way of reading and responding to the signs of time as follows, and I quote, "There are three stages which should normally be followed in the reduction of social principles into practice. First, one reviews the concrete situation. Secondly, one forms a judgment on it in the light of these same principles. Thirdly, one decides what, in the circumstances, can and should be done to implement these principles." These are the three stages that are usually expressed in these terms: observe, judge, act. End of quote. What does that tell us for the fight against modern slavery? How does such a statement can guide us in our urgent action to prevent children, women and men to become new victims of modern slavery and to be more efficient in detecting and rescuing them who are the current victims? A first answer lies in the first stage as quoted above, reviewing the concrete situation. And I was really impressed by the quotation by my colleague Christina from UNODC when she quoted the 1927 League of Nations statement. They called exactly the same way, for an exact knowledge. That means, and it's not easy for all of us, that means forgetting about our prejudices, ignoring those who deny, who say there is no problem in my country. My country is clean. Let's help others to fight against trafficking. But also ignoring those and the sensationalistic papers and discourses which in many cases aim at focusing the attention on the speaker more than on the victims. So let's forget about our prejudices and be ready to observe with rigor and precision as it is. leaving the myth behind to face the reality. This is not easy. It requires adequate observation tools and to know where we should look for. This is not a mistake. I just take another example of a problem which is deforestation, to see how different observation tools can guide us for more efficient action. So let's think about observation for deforestation. If we take this very micro observation, and we take this lens to look at victims of trafficking, here we will know a lot about the victim. We know the type of tree. We probably know the age of the tree. We will know a lot. We know about the trafficker. So this is the kind of data collection which is done by NGO when they rescue victims, by international organizations in their shelters to protect, a kind of anthropological data collection. And this is very important to have precise information. I would say this is a bit of the UNODC data or IOM shelter data. It's quite precise. Here we can have exact number of victims for one country, or maybe your data. You have the number, not so much detail as in the previous observation tool, but still, it gives a good picture globally of how many victims there are. Next step, and I take another observation tool, is something we try to introduce now at the ILO, is a more macro picture, which could help us to have trends. How is the figure evolving at national level? Is it decreasing or increasing? Where? So of course, here, when I look at deforestation at this level, I'm not that accurate, not as much. I don't know more details as an anthropologist will do, but still, this is quite important to understand the phenomenon. And last is a bit of our global estimate of forced labor. When we say 21 million or 20.9 million victims of forced labor and modern slavery, we're not sure. It could be 21 or 21.2 or even 20 or 19 or 22, actually, with our margins of error. But it gives us a global picture. It gives us how serious deforestation here, or for our global estimate, modern slavery is, and why altogether we should unite our strengths and means to combat it. So all observation tools are important. One is not better than the other one, as long as we don't use one to draw conclusions for the wrong level of policy and action. At country level, so at country level is typically what the commissioner for, the independent commissioner for UK told us this morning. What is important? To know what forms of modern slavery exist in the country. In many countries, this is the first work the ILO does with the stakeholders, just to map the forms. Either forced labor among child beggars, among these tribal communities, more in prostitution, in garment, in fishing. Well, what are the forms? Also, are citizens from my country victims of trafficking abroad? Who are the victims? How many are they? What can be done to detect and rescue them? What can be done to prevent? So these are the needs for data collection at national level. Business community, and when I say business community, I include trade unions. As ILO, I mean employers, trade unions, but also consumers. They will come and ask us to help to know what are the goods produced in the company which are made out of forced labor. Where does that happen? Who are the exploiters? What should be done to ensure that our supply chains are clean? And it's not that easy to answer. Look at all the work which has been done on our mobile phones, from the extraction of minerals in Africa till the factories in China, this whole supply chain. It's not only that we don't want to see, we don't have today the good tools to observe the situation. So those, when we look at the international community after the business and the national level, we still believe that global estimates help the international community to realize the extent of the problem, also to measure trends, if possible, and to be able to raise funds. Let's be concrete. When we publish the estimate, we hope that the international community will mobilize just to realize that something should be done, that the problem is important, and that victims are all over the world. So this typology, very simple typology of modern slavery, was used just to focus on three big forms of forced labor, mainly the forced labor exploitation in the classical forms of labor, the forced sexual exploitation, and the state-imposed, which covers prison labor and all child soldiers and all the forms of labor imposed by the state. You remember those figures, just to say all regions are affected. Prevalence per habitants, another way to present the data, again, to raise awareness. Who are the victims? You know, my point is not to come back to those figures, you know them. It's just to say how we use the data just to mobilize attention. More women than men, but still women in labor exploitation are quite important. In sexual exploitation, we have men and boys. In state-imposed, it's almost half. And altogether, there are more women than men, in spite of the high number of men in labor exploitation. With or without migration, this is also a very important point for policy making and for raising attention. No country can solve the problem alone. Because of this high rate of migration resulting in forced labor, we need to work together. And last slide with figures was with the profits. When we calculated this new estimate of the profit, again, we wanted to show why it is an issue and that everyone in the world, except the trafficker, loses. Countries, the first victims are, of course, the victims of trafficking, but countries lose taxes. Business who are doing fair business, they have illegal competition. So those 150 billion is a huge loss for the whole humanity. In the report, you have many figures, but I took only this one just to show, for example, sexual exploitation, the benefit made out of one victim, show why we can talk about using the person as commodity and the need for urgent action. So that was the first element, just observe. And I wanted to show that it's not that easy and we try always to improve our tools together. The second point is to form a judgment. The judgment is the result of what we call the statistical analysis. Figures don't speak for themselves. We need to give sense to them, even from the data produced by large-scale national survey on forced labor, it's not that obvious to derive useful, accurate information and conclusions. So the ILO calls for the use of solid statistical tools which allow extrapolation for econometric analysis. And I was really moved this morning to hear that the previous president of your academy was an econometrician calling for the use of econometric analysis to derive also conclusions, if I understood Italian correctly this morning, when you were talking about Edmond Malevaux. And I think this is quite important to introduce those solid, rigorous econometric tools in our field of trafficking. They will inform us on the determinants of trafficking in terms of econometric analysis. For example, it's not that's something we learned from our econometric analysis of survey. It's not always the poor women, uneducated, who are victims of trafficking. In Brazil, where we work, it seems that you're more likely to be a victim if you are a young man and quite educated, because the trafficker target those people to move them to, for deforestation and for exploitation in farms. So, you know, by doing strong and rigorous analysis, we can better judge the situation in order to better protect the victims. This judgment is critical to implement the final stage, which consists in deciding what should be done to implement our protection principles. At first, and direct follow-up action to research is awareness raising. And awareness raising, we all agree, is not the leaflet. It will become famous, your leaflet at the end of the church, at the back of the church. A good awareness raising is something that targets the right population with the right language. Too much money has been spent in useless awareness raising campaigns. We know that the resources are scarce. We don't want to waste them. So by doing this solid analysis, we hope we are now able to better target the people who should be sensitized and with the right language. The same applies for policy changes. Most of our research projects and reports end with a chapter on recommendations which are based not on prejudices but on the data collected, as well as feedback from all stakeholders from the civil society. And then the ILO accompanies countries in their legal reform if necessary, or policy changes when recommended. All this is done not as people who know and countries who don't know. No, it's done together by doing capacity building and working together. And this is true from the first stage of the research design till the implementation of the policy changes. Typical examples include the training of labor inspectorates. They are key for the detection of victims in factories. And they are the ones who know. It's not that sitting in Geneva we know how to detect victims in a factory in Buenos Aires. No, we don't. But working together, we can design the best training program for the labor inspectorate so that they will detect the victims in their country. The same applies for project design. The action will target the most vulnerable people for prevention, detection, rehabilitation. And also, survey results can be used at local, national, global level to raise funds to combat this form of exploitation. I gave thus, to conclude, 3 examples of reports that we have used to raise funds, to raise mobilization, and to act in countries. One was, the report is called Wounded Children, and it was designed in 4 countries in Africa, just on child soldiers issue. At that time, there were many reports of how there was a disconnect between the needs of the child soldiers and what the international community was offering. So we decided to go and listen to the first people, the first victims, who were child soldiers, released child soldiers, parents of child soldiers, and some representative of armed groups, to understand the recruitment pattern, who were those children that were found in armed groups in Africa. On the basis of this report, we were able to develop a program in 7 African countries to better target the needs, especially for rehabilitation. By listening to the children, we understood why they didn't want to leave the gun to become a tailor. They were all escaping the rehabilitation program. So the idea was to understand better their needs and to offer better programs. Another example is this Tricked and Trapped report about the risk of trafficking among domestic workers in the Middle East. Again, we lost ourselves some of our prejudices about the victims, their needs, and the attitude of key stakeholders. So that was done mainly with rescued victims, and based on that, we were able to work with the governments of both destination and source countries on targeted awareness raising, but really targeted. For example, what we do in Nepal is totally different from what we're going to do in Bangladesh, because it's not the same type of recruitment process, not the same victims. Policy changes, what should be done with the passport of the people, the migrant, national program, fundraising, capacity building, LIs for labor inspectors, police, judges. There was a whole program about access to justice for domestic workers in Lebanon, how to support their access to justice. And the last example is a different level. It was a national survey in Niger to estimate the prevalence of slavery or vestige of slavery. And this is a typical case where some people were saying, okay, it's really good that you do the survey because we know that you will find not a single person. And some figures were running from some NGO with 1 million persons. So we had one estimate of 0 and one of 1 million. So we did a probabilistic sample, national survey, and eventually came with a figure of something like 45,000, which made sense for the people who knew the country and stakeholders. Based on that, we are implementing now prevention and rehabilitation of those modern slavery forms. So yes, we do believe that spending money in research, in data collection, working together with all the people who collect data, being anthropological type of data, statistics like UNODC, national data collection is worthwhile, because if we better understand how the traffickers work as well, we have a chance to better protect the victims, which is our ultimate goal. Thank you.